Transformers!
Riddle of the Great Beings, Chapter 2. In the end, only Kobold was willing to come along with Cretaceous and Tarduk in search of the Red Star. Skedonius said it was crazy to go off on some wild rock steed chase so close to the date of the tournament, and Kiri was in a hurry to get back to Volcanus. Cretaceous suggested they take vehicles north, but Tarduk vetoed that suggestion. "Vehicles can't go where we're going, even tracked ones," said Tarduk. "Plus they make noise, and noise attracts bone hunters. No, we'll use sandstalkers." It took a certain amount of wheeling and dealing to borrow 3 of the beasts from an Equinox trader, especially since Tarduk wouldn't say where they were going with them. But within a short time, the 3 Agori were mounted and ready to start their expedition. The shortest route would be to go east of the Dark Falls and then north toward the volcanic region above the Black Spike Mountains. But the presence of Skrull, Voroks, and bone hunters up that way made it also the most dangerous. So Tarduk led the small party northwest, past the village of Tessara and Elbow Peak, and into the White Quartz Mountains. Kobold, being a native of Equinox, knew this region fairly well. There were paths that traders took through the peaks in search of anything of value they could sell. It was cold here, even worse than the desert by night. More than once the sandstalkers almost lost their footing on the smooth face of the crystalline rock. Although it made all 3 Agori nervous, they had to travel by day. It would be too easy to stray off the path in the dark and possibly tumble right off a cliff. After 2 days, they had moved far enough north that they were in completely unfamiliar territory. Whatever creatures lived in this region would never have been in the desert to the south, since they obviously thrived on cold. Cretaceous was on constant alert. That was why he was the first to notice that they were being stalked. "Should we stop?" asked Tarduk. "No," snapped Cretaceous. "That's the worst thing we can do. We need to go faster. Maybe we can lose them." Tarduk doubted it. He had spotted one of their pursuers. It looked a little like one of the wasteland wolves that live in the desert. Their paws had evolved to be able to traverse across the loosest sand, and they were highly effective trackers. But, Tarduk reminded himself, though it looked like one, their stalker wasn't one of those creatures. For one thing, this beast was half made of metal. Tarduk had never seen anything like it. "How many?" asked Kobold. "More than one," answered Cretaceous. 6 or 8, maybe. They're hard to spot." Tarduk wasn't sure how anything could move through the White Quartz Mountains unseen like this. As the day wore on, that became the least of his worries. No matter how fast the party moved, the wolves kept on their trail. No matter what trick they tried to evade pursuit, sending one sandstalker off in another direction, doubling back on their own trail, even leaving some of the precious supply of food on the trail to distract the pack, the wolves kept coming. "What are those things?" Tarduk asked for the 3rd time. Now they had to ride through the night, like it or not. Kobold shared Tarduk's mount, and Cretaceous led the way. Although it probably wouldn't matter anyway, Cretaceous refused to light a torch, fearing the wolves would see the light. Tarduk argued that they were probably tracking by scent, but it did no good. They wound up on a narrow, winding trail. On the right side was the face of the mountain. On the left, a sheer drop into darkness. The good news was that there was no place for the wolves to hide here. They would have to follow the trail as well, or give up, it seemed. The bad news was that even the sandstalkers were having a hard time finding their footing. One slip, and someone wouldn't be coming back from this trip. Moving as quickly as they dared, the 3 Agori made their way down the trail. Once, the mount carrying Kobold and Tarduk stumbled, and one pack of tools fell off and into the abyss. The sound of it striking bottom never came. Kobold looked back. In the bright light of the moons, he could see no sign of their pursuers. "I think we lost them. Do you think we lost them?" Tarduk glanced over his shoulder. He didn't see anything either, but said, "No, I don't think we lost them." "Neither do I," agreed Kobold. The trail began to widen, becoming more of a plateau. Dawn was breaking, the first rays of light reflecting off the quartz peaks. Cretaceous reined his sandstalker to a stop, and Tarduk did the same. They looked behind. There was no sign of the half-dozen fur and metal-covered wolves that had been following them. "Maybe they didn't make it across the trail," said Cretaceous, "or they found easier prey. Either way, I'm glad they're gone." There's one other possibility," suggested Tarduk. "They stopped following because they knew they didn't need to anymore." Cretaceous turned at the sound of a low growl, a hollow metallic sound that echoed throughout the mountains. Lined up on a ridge ahead were not 6 of the wolves, but 60. They had evaded a hunting pack, only to ride right into the den. To be continued. Riddle of the Great Beings, Part 3. The three Agori sat on their mounts, frozen with fear. Before them stood dozens of wolves, their bodies a weird mixture of muscle and fur and dull metal. Their eyes were gleaming points of savage light in the darkness. Tarda could smell their musky odor mixed with the scent of cold iron. "Watch out," whispered Cortesius. "They'll try to circle around us so we're surrounded. Then they'll attack." "Thanks for the nature lesson," Kerbold answered. "How do we get out of this?" "Ride through them," suggested Tarduk. "Maybe we can, outrun them." Cortesius patted the flank of his sandstalker. "I don't think these animals are going a step closer to those things if they can help it." Tarduk wished he could come up with another idea. Going forward was out. Going backward meant trying to race across a narrow trail with a pack of wolves at their heels. If they didn't fall into a bottomless abyss, they would have the fun of being eaten. He couldn't believe their journey was coming to an end so soon, and in such a horrible way. Cortesius was the first to spot a new arrival. Someone was coming up behind the wolf pack. The figure was bent and twisted and walked with a bad limp. He carried a staff in his left hand and seemed to be relying on it to stay upright. Even with the moonlight, it was impossible to see the armored being clearly. But then he spoke. "Down." It was a simple word, but delivered in a voice that sounded to Tarduk like the limbs of dead trees scraping against a shelter. To the amazement of the three Agori, the wolves crouched down against the frozen ground. The figure started hobbling forward, moving unmolested through the wolves. All Tarduk could think of was Malum, who, rumor had it, now lived among the bestial Voroks. But it wasn't Malum coming toward them. Tarduk heard Kerbold grasp in recognition. The Agori from the ice village of Equinox said, "Surel, but you're..." "Dead," the crippled warrior said. "Close to it, perhaps, but still among the living. Lost in the chaos of war was I, and left behind, bent and broken when the fighting moved on. And here I have been ever since." It was too much for Cortesius to take in. "You've been living in these mountains with these things?" "You are of the fire people," Surel said, as if seeing the Agori's red armor for the first time. "So you wouldn't know about the Iron Wolves, one of the great being's more efficient creations. I trained this pack, led them into battle, and when the world shattered, they stayed by my side. It was the wolves who brought me food and protected me from harm, and there were many in these mountains who would have done me harm." Surel reached down and petted one of the wolves, brushing his hand across fur and metal. "Maybe you have forgotten, or you never knew how things were before. Armies marching across the deserts, the jungles, the mountains, battling to claim the energy in the core of the world. The element lords led us into war, and when their actions destroyed the planet, they were trapped. Yes, they were trapped." Tarduk shivered. Was it getting colder, or was it fear that made him trouble? It would have been easy to blame the presence of Surel and his pets, but no, it was getting colder. The wind was picking up, and snow had begun to fall, lightly at first, then more heavily. Soon he could barely make out the aged warrior and his wolves through the storm. "Wait a minute," said Kerbold. "I remember the war. I remember how it ended, and I remember the element lords. But you said were trapped?" Surel nodded his head, a painful exercise due to his injuries. "I do not know why you have come here, but I tell you now to turn back. The element lords walk this planet once more, and the fortunate among you will die first." A roar filled Tarduk's ears. He looked toward the source of the sound. A massive wall of white was surging down the mountain, an avalanche of snow from which there could be no hope of escape. And standing atop the mountain, watching his doom rush down toward the Agori, stood a warrior made of ice. To be continued.